This afternoon, we are discussing with two people who have become very famous on Nigerian television. They have been advocating for the rights of people to their lives, have traveled to many places within Nigeria to do advocacy. One of their recent trips was to Adamawa State and then to Kano, where they tried to intervene to ensure that some rights, certain rights of people who have been affected are respected. With me in the studio, first Emmanuel Ogebe, famously known as the son of Justice Ogebe, a human rights activist, a victim of former head of state, that is Sani Abacha, who was detained by Sani Abacha until he left Nigeria, and is the leader of the United States Nigeria Law Group. With him is his partner that they've been working together, Reverend Dr. William Devlin.
Yes.
Human rights activist. He's traveled to many places. He's been working among communities and especially among women and, widows and orphans.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
Yeah, I'll start with you, Emmanuel. Now, you were in Adamawa State recently over the case of Sunday Jackson. Can you give us a brief? What is the matter all about?
Yes, so as you know, that part of the country has been ravaged by headsmen, massacres, and clashes that have claimed thousands of lives. And this situation was a case where Sunday Jackson was encroached upon by a headsman with his cattle and all of that. And in the process of confronting each other, the headsman attacked him with a knife. And in the process of, fighting, the Jackson was able to stab him back, and that one ultimately died. Now, what happened, unfortunately, was that the state decided to prosecute Jackson for murder. And Jackson's defense was that this was self-defense. I don't know this man from anywhere. He instigated this. Jackson was convicted and sentenced to death after being in prison for 7 years. This was a case that took only 5 days to try, and they spent 7 years to do the case. There were only 3 witnesses, including Jackson himself, who was the only eyewitness. So it was not a complicated case. And he was sentenced to death. So we heard about it that same week of his conviction. We went to Yola, we visited with him, we met with his counsel. He was represented by Legal Aid Council. And the Legal Aid Council also failed him because they didn't do the best job they could have done. The judge failed him because she did an awful job as well. Now, long story short, he has appealed. The appeal came up at the Supreme Court 2 weeks ago, and the Supreme Court upheld the judgment of the Court of Appeal, upholding the death sentence passed on him.
On what basis did the court?
Well, the judgment of the Supreme Court just came out literally 48 hours or so ago, and it's a 60-page document that is baffling. Now, what they are saying is that essentially he met all the elements for self-defense because he was not the aggressor. In fact, it was the weapon of the attacker that he used to attack him. But there were 2 points that they relied on. They said his action was vengeful because he stabbed the man 3 times. Meanwhile, the evidence is that the man stabbed him 2 times. So how is it excessive to stab somebody who stabbed you 2 times, 3 times? The Supreme Court is making a very dangerous precedent that if somebody slaps you 2 times, you must limit your slap to him to 2 times. And that is not what the law of self-defense is about. The man was attempting to kill you, and you did everything possible to stop him from killing you, including if you killed the person. The Constitution is actually very clear that anybody who dies in the process of someone else defending his property or protecting himself or the life of others has not been deprived of his life. So the Nigerian Constitution says the death of that Fulani headsman, Baruo, was not a criminal offense. And yet, Sunday Jackson has been sentenced to death. In fact, one of the judges said that, if he had stabbed him only once, then the defense of provocation would have been enough. But because he stabbed 3 times. Now, for some of us who have seen crime scene cases and so on and so forth, especially in the US, you have stabs of 27 to 30. And those are considered crimes of passion. 3 times is very minimal for a mortal combat when you are involved in an altercation where you would have lost your life. And so that reasoning of the Supreme Court is very bizarre by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, to make matters worse, on page 1 of the Supreme Court judgment, it said that Jackson stabbed him twice. And then by the time you read to the end of the judgment, it now changes to thrice. So the judgment is not even consistent within itself. So is the Supreme Court saying that if page 1 of his judgment is correct, that he stabbed him twice, that okay, he's free. But because page 5 and page 7 said it was 3 times, oh, that was excessive? So I have to say, I am very discouraged from this judgment of the Supreme Court, because in a climate where we have terrorists who attack communities, kill Nigerian military, kill thousands of Nigeria, come back and say they are repented, they are forgiven, they are inducted into the army, they are given weapons, and they steal the weapons and go back to fight against Nigeria. We have a man who the society, the government could not protect, who protected himself, and who the government now wants to kill. Let me make one last point. This man has been in prison on death row for 10 years, and then he's to be killed. There are 2 really atrocious things about this action. The first is that he has already suffered 10 years imprisonment. In fact, it would have been better that he was killed that day by that man than to have spent 10 years imprisonment and then be killed. That is double jeopardy of the worst possible fact. The second thing that makes this so, atrocious is that a man attempted to kill him, he managed to protect his life, and the government wants to finish the assassination attempt that the man started. Any person of good conscience anywhere in the world should find this scenario unacceptable.
So while at the options, because the Supreme Court is the final court.
So we're looking at a number of things. And here's something interesting I saw in the judgment. Justice Samani, in his own opinion, said that Jackson met all the requirements for self-defense. He actually said that. He said that the only problem was that in Adamawa State, there's an additional provision of the penal code about proportionality of response, and that the 3 stabs was disproportional. I can assure you that there's no sane Nigerian who will tell you that you were stabbed twice and you stabbed the other person 3 times and it was disproportionate. It is like soccer, okay? When you have a tie, you must have, in the era of golden penalty, so you must have a tiebreaker. You play extra for the one person to score and it's all over. Now we have penalty shootout. You shoot out till 1. That was what happened. You stabbed me, I stabbed you. You stabbed me, I stabbed you. Till the last man standing. That is what happened. So there's no logical scenario in which somebody who was stabbed twice, stabbing another person 3 times, was excessive.
Now, to you, Reverend William Devlin, you recently asked that they could execute you rather than Mr. Sunday Jackson. Why did you make that offer?
Yeah, I made the offer because of the Gospel of St. John, chapter 15, verse 13, which is a great verse. It says, "Greater man has no love than a man lays down his life for his brother." So when I looked at that, I said, well, Jesus laid down his life for me. Why can I not lay down my life for Sunday Jackson? So that was the offer I gave. Whether or not the offer was hang me by the neck and release Sunday Jackson. So that was the offer I made publicly in an interview, and it's been replicated all over Nigeria. And people are very surprised that why does a white pastor have to come from America to save a Nigerian? Where are the Nigerian pastors that will do the same thing? So unfortunately, that was a bit of an indictment against those that would not stand for Sunday Jackson. But thanks be to God, now that I've said that, and we've been working with Sunday Jackson since February 19th of 2021, when we had the opportunity to visit him in Yola at the Adamawa State Prison. And we were able to meet him, minister to him, pray for him, and also to hear his story from his own lips. And so we've been advocating now for him these last 4 years. We were in the Nigerian Supreme Court as the case was delivered and dismissed on March 7th, 2025. And then we began this battery of media interviews to say we must stand up for not just Sunday Jackson, but for the Sunday Jacksons of Nigeria, because there are others who are in similar atrocious, unimaginable, ignoble cases of abuses of human rights, where here Sunday Jackson was just defending himself. And unfortunately, the other man who attacked him died because they were engaged in this mortal combat. And yet we were back in Adamawa State just the other day and met with the father of the deceased. And the father submitted an official letter on his signature, the father of the man that was killed by Sunday Jackson, asking the governor, Fintiri, of Adamawa State for a pardon for Sunday Jackson. So that was highly unusual, but we were able to deliver that letter from the father of the deceased and said, let Sunday Jackson go. Please, Mr. Governor, Your Excellency, pardon Sunday Jackson. So it's now not only become a Nigerian-wide case, not just because of my offer to be hung and take my life instead of Sunday Jackson. It's not only now all throughout Nigeria, as Barrister Emmanuel Ogebe and I have presented ourselves of examples as we've come here from the U.S. and say we must fight for the dignity of this innocent man, Sunday Jackson. And now it's gone beyond the borders of Nigeria. It's gone to Europe. It's gone to the UK. It's gone to Canada. It's gone to the U.S. And now people have a particular eye on Nigeria. What will they do for Sunday Jackson? Will he be pardoned? Will there be a commutation of sentence? So that's what we're working toward. That's what we're hoping for. And we're asking your viewers and your listeners to pray for the pardon of Sunday Jackson, much like the father of the deceased man has already done.
Yeah, this is the second time that you're offering your life for somebody. You offered your life for Leah.
Yes.
And the Boko Haram did not grant your request. Do you have any guarantee that this time your request will be granted?
Well, let me say quickly about that he is making the offer to Nigerian government, not to a faceless group of non-state actors. So they have the capacity to accept his offer or otherwise. But I want to add a little historical perspective, which is that a few years ago, a young Nigerian boy was imprisoned for blasphemy. And a Jewish American wrote to the Nigerian government and offered to serve the prison time for the boy. And of course, the Nigerian government did not accept the offer. But if we go a little back to Biafra, this is very fascinating that an American student was so upset about the starvation of Biafrans in Nigeria, the genocide that was going on, that he set himself ablaze in New York and died. And it was that singular action that prompted the global community to intervene in the Biafra genocide. So it's not unusual, unfortunately, that Nigeria has attracted this kind of negative attention and sacrifice.
Okay, maybe let's move over quickly to, you were also in Kano. What took you to Kano?
Yes.
Well, that's a very tragic situation. On Christmas Day 2019, a bunch of people from NAPTIP and the police raided a missionary's home and took away the orphans that they were raising. They've been serving in Kano for more than 25 years. And so they raided their orphanages in Kano and Kaduna, packed all the children, imprisoned the missionaries, and put the children in a government-run, orphanage. Now, the missionary was imprisoned on appeal. The Court of Appeal vacated his conviction, said he was a model citizen, he should never have been prosecuted, set him free. So very glowing remarks from the Court of Appeal. To return the children, the government of Kano has failed to do that for 6 years. So what has happened is they filed an action, a human rights enforcement action, to get the children back. For 2 years, that case has gone nowhere. And this is a fundamental human rights enforcement action which should be expedited. The judge kept insisting that they should settle. So 2 weeks ago, we flew into Kano. We sat down with the ministry. We discussed the need for settlement for over 2 hours.
Which ministry?
Ministry of Women's Affairs.
Yeah.
And we gave them a draft settlement. They reviewed it, and we left back to the US.
Yeah.
Only to be contacted last week that the settlement has been approved, that the Ministry of Women's Affairs offered their own amendments, and that the amended version was approved.
Yeah.
It was signed by the ministry and the missionaries, and the court had adopted it as a consent judgment by the parties, and the children were to be released on or before March 19. Armed with this information, on Monday we got on a plane and flew to Kano on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we went to the orphanage by 2 p.m., the government orphanage, for the handover, only to hear that the commissioner said she was otherwise engaged, and therefore it's been postponed indefinitely.
Yeah, Commissioner of Women's Affairs.
And
Didn't
that was
show
the
up.
beginning of the shenanigans. We found out that the children had been bribed with iPhones and iPads and told not to leave. We found out that they were told that if they go to Christianity, they will be killed. They would kill them. And all sorts of blackmail. So we were there for several hours. The commissioner finally showed up and displayed the most disgusting behavior I have ever seen of a public official to a foreign delegation. They threatened to smash our phones. They threatened to smash Dr. Devlin's phone. They threatened to smash the lawyer's car. It was sheer madness. And we had to escape from there for our lives. As I speak to you now, the date of the court order for the return of the children expired. Today is now the 23rd of March. They were supposed to have been returned 19th. We're in a state of lawlessness in Nigeria for that sort of thing to happen.
Yeah. And we feared for our lives there at the Nasarawa Children's Home. And as I was being silent, the Commissioner of Women's Affairs turned to me and said, "Go to hell. You will never get these children. We will not release these children." End of quote from the Commissioner.
And to be clear, we were not getting the children. We were observers.
Yeah, just observers.
For the implementation of the court order. It's very bizarre. Again, this is the Commissioner for Women's Affairs. You expect them to be a bit more graceful, a bit more gracious, be a bit more decent.
Yeah,
What I saw was shocking. I never knew that Northern Nigeria has degraded to this extent of barbarism. If it was a male commissioner who did that, it's one thing. But the effrontery to threaten, when I see people playing demigod here, I laugh at them. You people don't know what is power. You don't know what is security. And you attacked us because we're observing a court order transfer which you failed to comply with.
What happens to the kids now?
The kids are still with them.
Yeah, still.
And a consensus judgment.
Yes, a consent judgment.
It's been vacated.
Drafted by them
Drafted by them.
and adopted by the court. They say they want to study the judgment.
Yeah.
Do you understand how stupid that sounds?
Yeah.
You want to study it at this point. Something that was drafted by your ministry and signed by your lawyer. What are you going to study?
The Commissioner of Women's Affairs, on the 19th, when she finally arrived, as we waited for her 5 hours, she said, I need to study the agreement, and the AG needs to examine it. It's already been done. The cake is already baked. They agreed, her legal team agreed, the orphanage directors agreed. We were there on the 19th of March simply to view what was going to happen. And then the whole thing collapsed. So now here we are, almost a week later, saying, well, what's going to happen next?
You see, we don't want to escalate this too much. This is simple. Release these children.
Yes.
Do you
that's
know
all
that
we
the
want.
commissioner was threatening the children in our presence that they will refund her the feeding money that they used to feed them for 5 years? Do you see how mad these people are? Kano State is home to the highest number of out-of-school children in Nigeria. We're talking about in the millions. They are not taking care of their own children. They went and took other people's children and turned them to Amajiri. Does that even make sense? This is the nonsense that we're dealing with.
What are the options that are left now for the orphanage home?
Well, I think clearly one of the options is to cite the commissioner for contempt if she doesn't comply with the court order, so that, you know, she will taste and see what the rule of law is all about.
And all we're asking for simply is release the children. This has been litigated for 6 years. The children have been held against their will in this Islamist home, children's home in Kano. Just release them. They're going to go to a safe place that will care for them much better than where they are now. So just release the children. That's our simple request.
Okay, thank you very much